Ready. I'm going to call this meeting of the board to order. We're having a special meeting of the Board of Education and open session workshop tonight to discuss establishing the Board of Education Safety and Security Ad Hoc Committee, which we've been talking about as the Safety and Engagement Ad Hoc Committee. To get us started this evening in this conversation, we're going to hear from David Hart, Karen Kepler, and Leah Esser about the 2020 ad hoc recommendations and the progress that those recommendations have made up to this point.
Okay.
Sorry, I was having technical difficulties. I'm here now.
I see Leah and David. So Leah and David, if you want to get us started, we'll circle back to Karen. We're just hoping to check in with you about the progress of the last ad hoc committee's recommendations and where we are on those as part of kind of establishing some base information for how we move forward with this next iteration of the safety ad hoc committee.
Mr. Hart, would you like to start?
Leah, I'm touching down at the office, so please start.
Okay, you bet. Okay, I'd be happy to get started. What I can represent this evening is just a bit of a conversation about the recommendations as they relate to restorative justice. You will find that there were, I believe, and my computer was having issues as I was logging in here, so I'll get my notes up in a second. The first three, I believe, recommendations are solidly centered around restorative justice. One speaks about a vision for restorative justice and developing a district and community vision. And that that process has begun. We are looking to work with an external facilitator to bring together our teams across schools and teams across the community and district. Additionally, there are training recommendations. There is then bringing that group together to form a vision. And so we're working on that process with a consultant. So you will hear updates on that progress as we move along. That is work for the second semester. Additionally, there are recommendations regarding professional development for both the senior leadership team and the Board of Education. We are working with our partners, the YWCA, to provide that training, and that sequence has begun. And then the other thing related to restorative justice that I'd like to report out on is the restorative justice coordinators. There was a recommendation that we hire school-based staff, coordinator staff in our high schools to work on restorative justice exclusively. And so we made progress by adding 4 of those positions in our schools. Our team is responsible for supporting those individuals and ensuring that they are equipped to implement a school-wide restorative justice strategy, both from a professional development and professional knowledge sense and a systems development and systems development lens. There are additional recommendations within the ad hoc that I just need to pull up my notes that I said just I was having those technical difficulties that I can continue to report out on, but if maybe talk through, I can pull that up and get it back on the screen here.
Yeah, are you looking for the recommendations from the 2020? Are you looking for something else?
No, I'm looking for my notes.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. My apologies.
All right.
Is Karen or Mr. Hart here? I just don't want to, I really apologize. My computer is just acting very strange.
Recording in progress.
So Karen just jumped on. Would you like to give us a little bit of info on the 2020 ad hoc recommendations and their progress to date? Leah's having a little technical difficulty.
Of course. Good evening. A lot of work that went into the 2020 recommendations. Very proud of that committee. 2 items that came for my team to focus on was the data collection on when police were involved or consult around police. So making sure that our team, when we are consulting and working with schools, the requirement for schools to inform our team, the Office of School Safety, when there is a police contact, so that we can then, the second part of it is to debrief after an incident has occurred, especially as the recommendations share on there, whether or not IEPs were followed, and debriefing how the team responded to those calls. So a lot of work, especially in our high schools, doing that work, and even doing some pre-consult prior to involving police. And that also includes with being very clear on when police are, when we're required to call police and when we have discretion. So that has been a good 1.5 years of work with our high schools, even pre ad hoc committee, to ensure that we were very consistent with understanding by state statute what we were required to report and what is consult. And again, the Office of School Safety is working to streamline those debriefing sessions so that it involves more than just the Office of School Safety, but also the school critical response team, and also any other staff member that is providing academic programming, because there is, when you do the debrief, you do look into students that have been disengaged, and we want to re-engage them back in school. So on that end, the second I'm really excited for was the hire for Cedric Morris. He's the Director of Office of School Safety, and his line of work of how to streamline and professionalize the SSA group and making sure that they're getting what they need. So Cedric Morris has been onboarded the last 6 months, but really gaining footing on some of the ideas on where he wants to move with this SSA unit to really talk more about student engagement in the high school. So I'm really proud of his work and where he's going. So more to report on that. I know that he has some really good ideas going into next school year. Leah, are you ready to take on from that? Okay.
Yes, thank you. I got my computer, my 2 monitors. I was all freaking out over here. So thank you.
And Leah, if I can, one other exciting piece of our work, when we talk about data and collecting it, we also talk about it's K-12, and any time that we are involving police in an emergency situation, kindergarten through 12. And that's really about a lost child, to sometimes students are making a false 911 call. So it's really this opportunity to really teach and debrief with schools around when to call police, when not to call police, when to involve emergency procedures or not. So really our data that we're collecting is really around K-12 in all our sites. All right, I'm going to pass that on to you, Leah.
Much appreciated. Thank you for hopping in there.
Yeah, you bet.
The next piece I want to discuss or report out on is regarding disciplinary policy and intervention. There were recommendations for increased support for students. Also, recommendations related to meaningful alternatives to suspension and discipline policy. So I can report that our schools are making great progress and are supported through their alternatives to suspension programs. And we continue to expand the options for alternatives to suspension for our students. The behavior education plan is reviewed annually for updates. This year, we will be bringing updates to the Board of Education that are less substantive in sort of philosophical approach to behavior, and really more addressing certain issues that have come up. The following school year, we intend to be proposing more wide-scale changes that we are able to make after deep assessment and evaluation. So that is our plan for that recommendation. So we will be making some minor changes this school year with the intention of making some more substantive changes the year before. This is for a variety of reasons, including staff. For a variety of reasons, our timeline. This also recommendation talks about really eliminating or decreasing the use of suspension and expulsion. And I can report that our moratorium on suspension at elementary is also an incredibly important step in the right direction. So that will actually be codified into the behavior education plan this coming spring, along with some other changes and then more substantive changes moving forward. Additionally, there was a recommendation that was related to just prevention and holistic needs for safety, mental health being one of those areas. Dr. Getchow is not able to join us this evening, but I can just report that we continue steadfast with our mental health strategy moving forward, including seeking to ensure we have stable funding for our mental health programs that isn't dependent upon grants or other funders. So that is a part of our thinking related to this recommendation. It is important, however, to note that we have to be thoughtful in any expansion of mental health programming and are being thoughtful in that expansion because of the availability of clinicians and partners in our community. So we are having, in light of the pandemic that we are still navigating, having to have creative conversations about how we look at mental health differently and more holistically across the board. And wanted to mention that. That generally is a really high level overview of our work around these recommendations from student and staff supports.
And thank you so much. And Leah, thank you as well for those updates in terms of the work that was previously done by the board safety ad hoc. David Hart, would you like to add anything before the board kind of engages in conversation around what's been done previously?
Well, I'm here to simply answer questions, and I feel like Dr. Esser and Karen handled this well and capably. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David Hart. Board Member Vandermillen, I see your hand up.
Yes, let me lower that hand. For those students who do not use the behavior education plan due to severe disability and opt out, are we still putting a behavior plan in their IEP? And do we still allow students to opt out if the disability is severe enough?
Yeah, Nikki, I don't want to misspeak because I'm not in these spaces and Nancy is not here with us this evening, but yes, if a student has specific disability related needs, those conversations are a part of a student's IEP and behavior support plan development, and theirs would be special considerations to their plan based on their known disability and the needs of their disability.
Perfect. That's all I needed to know. Thank you so much.
That.
Open it up for discussion. Are there other questions board members have about the prior safety ad hoc? And Nama and Gordon, feel free to ask any questions you might have. A lot of the board members were on the board during that ad hoc, although some folks were not. But Gordon and Nama, if you have questions, just as folks who were not as involved in the board at that time as you are now, please don't hesitate to ask. This is a great time to kind of talk about that work, especially Gordon, as you'll be one of our leaders of the next ad hoc. All right, if there are no other questions about the work done prior to this ad hoc, I think we can jump into creating the charge for this ad hoc. I'm gonna ask Board Vice President Savian Castro to read the charge that was assigned to the last ad hoc. And Sabian Castro served as one of the board's liaisons to that ad hoc. Or was one of the board members serving on that ad hoc with Gloria Reyes. So Sabian, if you'd want to speak to kind of the work you all did.
Yeah, so there was the formal charge at the inception of the ad hoc, and then the committee itself formulated a dynamic mission of the ad hoc. So the formal charge was the committee is charged with examining safety and security options of our high schools related to removing SROs out of our Madison School District high schools. The work of the committee will focus on budget and policy recommendations to the board. Specifically, review information regarding the 2016 ad hoc committee. Consider safety and security high school systems that would remain the same, revise, strengthened, and/or change what needs to be in place when schools reopen. Consider resources needed to support safe schools and the reallocation of resources. Review and make recommendations regarding current Board of Education policies regarding safety, security, and police involvement. Specifically, policies 4224, 4147, and 4400, and expand 4400 to include more details of required police involvement and continued relationship with MPD for Act 81 and 143 in response to mandated reporting requirements, and recommended alternatives to exclusionary policies. And then kind of the dynamic charge that the ad hoc found consensus on, through our conversations, was how can the district be more proactive in promoting healthy student behavior, restorative justice philosophies, and equitable school safety and climate. And just to bring up a few salient themes that came up during that ad hoc committee, if I may, was the concept of 360-degree accountability for students and staff in schools, taking seriously the perceptions that we have of our Black students for alleged misbehavior, and how important engagement and feeling belonging in the classroom is to students, to student behavior in our schools. And really, we talked about an approach to restorative justice in our high schools. We talked about stipends for student leaders in restorative justice and family leaders in restorative justice. I've seen this actually at work at our high schools from last semester when we had a few things that happened. We saw parents stepping up, we saw students stepping up to be leaders. And I think that just kind of naturally happened. And I think those conversations acknowledge, not just in our schools, but in our communities, that we have an informal network of people that help resolve conflict without the use of, these old systems of punishment and oppression that have disproportionately impact our Black and brown populations here in Madison. And finally, I'll say that while the formal charge was related to the 4 specific high schools, because it was under the shadow of removing police from our schools, we all acknowledge that this conversation has to go beyond the 4 high schools. It's got to go to all 48 to 52 schools. It's got to start at 4K. We need to be talking to students about restorative justice and navigating conflict amongst themselves and each other right when they get into our system, and how can we bring our community into this as well, because as we know, these things aren't confined to the 4 walls of a classroom. It's in and out. So thank you.
Thanks, Board Member Castro. I'm going to ask now that board members each respond to what they'd like to see this ad hoc committee charged with. And I'll start by saying one of the major areas of departure for this ad hoc in comparison to the last 2 safety ad hocs is really a conversation that emphasizes the mental health of our students. I think that we've had conversations about safety in the absence of child psychologists, in the absence of adolescent mental health experts. And I'm committed to making sure those folks are at the table for this conversation about safety. I also think that this is a conversation that we want to have with our school leaders with our principals and with our communities. And I want to thank Maya Pearson, Gordon and Ananda Morelli for stepping up to lead this and for, being really thoughtful in terms of how they want to include the community and who they think should be a part of this ad hoc. With that being said, my main distinguishing factor is the emphasis on the mental health of our students and the mental health of our young people. And I'm curious what other board members are hoping we focus on and emphasize and charge this ad hoc with. And I'll start with board member Vandermeulen.
Yes, mental health, I think, is paramount. One, I know we're short-staffed, but having our psychiatrists and our counselors doing lunch duty and doing research duty may not be the best for social and emotional learning of our students during a pandemic. I know we're short-staffed at the same point. I think we need to put a priority on those who have the training to help our youth and lift our youth out of this issue. My other issue that I think we need to take a big look at is bullying. We've seen it. Most of us in this room have been victims of bullying, and it's pervasive and it's a problem in almost every high school in the United States. However, when it comes to I can't say when it comes to Black and brown students, but when it comes to disabled youth, it's a massive, massive problem. And I think from what I've read, Black and brown students are also, if not more affected than the disability community, but I don't have firsthand knowledge. So I can't testify to what I don't see. But what I can say is this: every child should feel safe at school. I want to make sure that they feel safe mentally, not just physically. I don't want them just physically being there passive robots. I want them to be there to actually immerse and enjoy school and learn what skills they want, what things they want to do. And I think you can't do that if you're afraid of for your own personal safety. So bullying is my main one.
Thank you so much for lifting that, board member Vandermeulen. Board member Pearson.
Yeah, thank you. I think mental health is one of the biggest focuses for me as well. I think that finding ways to loop in our community and not only have it, where we are short-staffed, we have only a certain amount of social workers, a number of psychiatrists. So then how are we making that up from our community to help support us? I think my colleague Nikki on bullying is super important. One thing I would like to really focus on is how can we make our environments more inviting, where children actually feel as though that they can have a stake and actually input. So ensuring that the students' voice is actually part of this while we're going along. So it's not just board members or adults that are determining this, but hopefully having students and youth from all levels, so from elementary, middle, and high school part of this, so that they can also tell us what they would like to do. I think that that's super duper important. And so, yeah, those are kind of the things that I would like to make sure happens during this ad hoc.
Thank you so much, board member Pearson. Board member Carusi.
So I agree with everything that has been said so far. I would add to that list two things. The first one is that when we formed this committee, one of the things we were hearing loud and clear from our students was that sexual violence and sexual assault are serious, serious issues in our schools. And I would like to see this committee address that, not just from the perspective of reporting, but from the perspective of how we can use human growth and development and other opportunities to teach a culture of consent in our schools. The other one is I would be interested in having this committee dive into how instruction intersects with behavior in our schools, and what we could be doing with instruction to keep kids engaged and keep kids out of trouble. So.
Thank you so much, board member Carusi. Board member Morelli.
President Mojo, do you mind if I go last?
No, not at all. Board member Gomez-Schmidt.
Thank you. And just what I've been trying to wrap my head around is going forward how we are going to take what we learned from the previous ad hoc. And I really appreciate you giving us the summary today about what has been done and how we're moving forward and continuing to act on those recommendations. One of my questions is, and I guess this is more of a question and trying to frame it in my head is there a superintendent's advisory committee and the ongoing advisory committee that were recommended? Are those going to mesh somehow with this group going forward? Or I guess this is more of a discussion conversation for us, but how do we see this? Like, what do we see as the outcomes of this new ad hoc committee that we're forming? Is it going to be another set of recommendations, or do we see this as there are specific concrete outcomes and goals that we're looking for when we're forming this committee?
Board Member Gorman-Schmidt, I want to thank you for those questions. So I think similarly to other ad hocs, this group will come together and have a voting capacity to submit recommendations to the board. Whether or not our ad hoc committee relates to the superintendent's, I want to say human resources ad hoc committee, so SHRAC. Whether or not this ad hoc is in community with SHRAC, I think is up to us. And I think if that's something you're advocating for, this would be the time to do it. So saying, hey, one of the things I want us to do differently is for this ad hoc to be, in connection with the superintendent's advisory group. I think defining what we're charging the ad hoc with will also kind of speak to how the ad hoc is facilitated and what outcomes it produces, right? We can't really ask what it's going to produce if we haven't charged it with anything first. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. So I guess in addition to what others have already said about mental health, I think that's really important. The way that we are figuring out how to engage students so that they are coming to school and are engaged and feel part of their school community is just like others have already said, I think is really important. One of the other things is, I think the push to do another discussion around this is, really taking a look at how we immediately respond to situations that happen in our schools. And so how does this fit with our comprehensive safety and security plans that we do have? Like every high school, every middle school, every elementary school already has these plans and staff in place to support these plans. So but figuring out how we make sure that, I guess I would recommend that we have staff voice alongside community voice, or however we're going to put this group together to form it so that we're figuring out how those pieces fit together.
Thank you so much. Board Member Gorman-Schmidt.
Can I say one more thing? The one other piece I forgot is just, we have talked before and previous boards have talked before about a comprehensive counseling model, like school counselors, and the ratios that are needed and recommended. And we never went back and acted on that. So I think taking a look at in addition to the mental health supports, how the counselors are part of that too, and the counseling model.
I really appreciate that. Board Member Gorman-Schmidt. Board Member Castro, are there things that you think are areas that were not emphasized in the last ad hoc that you think would be helpful to strengthen that work? I know you spoke to kind of this being something we want to do K through 12 or 4K through 12. And making sure we're having a broader relationship with safety, but specifically in terms of the charge of this ad hoc. Do you want to speak to how that fits in?
Yeah, the last ad hoc was specifically in the shadow of the decision to remove police from schools. And so I think this is an opportunity to be more expansive because it's bigger than police in 4 schools. It's got to be a systems-wide approach, not to just 4 schools. Additionally, I guess a more pragmatic recommendation I'd like to see is us hosting some of these meetings in person in schools during the school day with big student involvement. I think that was something that we were very much limited by last time this happened because it was during COVID, everything was virtual. So I think that is a way to encourage more student involvement. I think, and it's tough because we have to vote and approve the membership. And so in some ways that legal dynamic restricts participation in terms of, we can't have like student walk-ins participating, but I'd like to see us be creative in that way. I think the emphasis on mental health is critical. I'd like to see us take a look at counselor and school psych ratios across all of our 52 schools here in Madison. I think we can take a look at, whether looking at our micro school model from previous years could be beneficial, a smaller, more culturally responsive school environment. And finally, I'd like to see how this meshes with our academic plan. I can't emphasize enough how much a feeling of belonging in the classroom came up last time and how that impacts mental health, how that impacts someone's sense of worth, which I think leads into finally my last one is really touching on student voice and encouraging a young person's ability to advocate for themselves in all settings in their life.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Board Member Castro. Nama, what would you like to see us focus on when we talk about safety in schools?
Yeah, of course. I think a lot of things that I had in mind were already highlighted by Board Member Pearson, but I think having these student voices involved in a lot of these circles and discussions is possibly the most important aspect of this safety discussion, because hearing a lot, we've talked about this in Student Senate before, and a lot of students just wanted to kind of not really lead, but be just kind of have a control over their own like restorative justice circle, for example. We were taking that into example a lot, and having these led by more students or maybe student leaders rather than adults is just a perspective that they just appreciate more and they feel more comfortable in. So I think having more of these discussions in spaces, just kind of student facilitated or like student led, just makes it more like welcoming and empowering and just something that they can learn from, instead of, taking it as just kind of lecture from an adult, from a counselor, kind of having a sense of like, oh, I understand what I did wrong and how I can better myself. So I think just making sure that they're kind of involved in like this decision making, and also in kind of what happened to lead to this point is also important too, that I wanted to highlight. But that's all.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Nama. Gordon, I would love to hear from you, but I also want to just say that I think Board Member Morelli is one of the first board members who came forward and said she wanted to support this, but only if students were represented and at the table and making decisions and had a vote. So for the board members who have said, we want students to be a part of it, I want them to know that Gordon has come forward and said he would help to chair this next iteration of an ad hoc. So thank you, Gordon, for your leadership. And what would you like to see us focus on with this ad hoc?
Thank you, President Mojo, for the warm welcoming. And also thank you, Board Member Morelli. I really do appreciate you and all of you all who are on this call today. So I just wanted to first, reiterate that, we're pressed for time. Like we want to accomplish a lot of things, and we know how bureaucracy works. We know how long it takes to do policy work. So we kind of have to, draft a core set of goals here. And, it is totally doable. And I'm not saying that we should, forget the other goals. I'm just saying that, to be as effective as possible, like focusing on 2 to 3 things to me seems best. I do agree that mental health should be at the forefront, because we see, mental health being, literally core to a lot of, things that go into like, student behavior, student wellness, all of those things. I also want to mention like implementation, right? We can make so many recommendations, we can say so many things, but I just want like have like clear implementation strategies, instead of just saying like, oh, this should be implemented by this, or, it should look like this, but in vague terms, like have it more so that they could be like a step-by-step, basis, so that when it comes time to implementation, that neither party are confused or upset with how it's being implemented and the eventual, progress of it. And, I feel like with restorative justice work, I see, East has a restorative justice coordinator. I'm pretty sure some of the other high schools do as well. But making sure, like, how do we integrate them into our community? Like, I know of the RJ coordinator, but that's because I try to familiarize myself with, the staff in the building, and because I try to do a lot of work with them. But I'm sure like a lot of other students may not know, much about the RJ coordinator or even what they even dare to do. So maybe, get that more integrated community more and try to find a way that we could like have our psychologists at the school play a role in wellness. They study this, this stuff, right? And like, why not like incorporate them into these discussions and to see like how they can build relationships with students. So not only that they can, prevail engagement in classes, but also wellness too. And I'm looking at my notes here, and when it comes down to mental health support, that is, like we all said, that's critical, right? But like, what exactly do we want to see with mental health? Like how we can create goals that are like measurable, so that we can, be able to track some, some progress here. And that's the counseling support. Like people on this call mentioned how, counselors are overwhelmed. I know one of the board members mentioned how we need to have some type of like concrete counseling model. So that kind of goes back to my point there, like making sure that we are, very like how the way we do implementation, that it is like actual, like step-by-step doable, if you know what I mean. But yeah, so overall, what I just want to see is that, students feeling a sense of wellness in their classes and their extracurricular space, and just in school in general, because that's what school should be about. You should come to school, you should feel included, you should feel welcome, you should feel safe. And also making sure that we get community input in these things, and to ensure that we have, a lot of accountability measures in place and SMART goals. That's all that I have. And thank you all again for this.
Thank you so much, Gordon. Board Member Morelli.
Yeah, thank you so much, President Woodrow. Thank you so much, all my colleagues. And thank you so much, Gordon, for your sharp vision and your analysis around this work. And I know you've done a lot of legwork already to get up to date to what has been done in regards to previous committees, and also to make sure that you have your fingers on the pulse of what's happening, specifically at East, but in all the high schools. I don't have any particular thing to add, but I will say that, Madison is not short of beautiful, amazing, humane goals. That hasn't been our challenge. Our challenge has not been from not having amazing people at ad hoc committees. Our challenge has not been of having really good comprehensive plans. Our challenges have been really what our colleague Gordon made it salient, is around how do we implement and model and implement those practices and have them shift the culture. And I think that's the only one word that I would like to add, President Woodrow, is that the goal is not just the restorative justice program or the enhancement of counseling. The goal should encompass a shift in the way of our culture. And I really appreciate Board Member Caruzzi also speaking to beyond reporting. What does it look like to have culture of practice, of consent culture, right? That we are practicing, all of us are practicing consent culture. What does it look like that all of us are practicing human relations with each other, and kindness and love and compassion, and being in the space of restoring relationships. And the last thing I would add, President Woodrow, I think even though we're really specifically, and this work is going to really specifically be targeted to the wellness of young people, but the wellness of young people heavily on the wellness of our adults in the building, adults in our community, parents, youth workers, our partners. So I'm excited to open that opportunity to, and how we're going to continue to support all the adults that support young people in the building. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Board Member Morelli. There are two areas that I want to speak to now that folks have gotten a chance to go around, and one is specific to the LGBTQ community. And so making sure that our LGBTQ students have a voice, and our LGBTQ families and staff have a voice in this process in terms of what safety means to folks who are members of that community, and what it means to be welcomed at school as your whole self and all of your identities is an area of emphasis. And then violence prevention. And you know, I really appreciate Chris for framing us in the proactive of, you know, consent culture. I think when we talk about something as severe as gun violence, often we're talking about responding to it. And in part because there's not really a space for a young person who wants to turn in a gun or wants to make our district aware of the presence of a weapon. There's not really a space or a facilitated process for that young person to engage in, to hand in a weapon or to, you know, make us aware of a weapon that makes them feel unsafe at home without getting in trouble. And so I think looking at what we can do preventatively and what we can do proactively to address phenomena of violence within our community is something I'd really like to charge this committee with. Before we move on to our next meeting, and we have 2 meetings following this meeting, I am wondering if anybody wants to speak specifically to how we want to engage the community in this process beyond who we appoint to participate in the ad hoc. And if folks have any interest in speaking to specific policy recommendations or budget focus before we move on. And Board Member Vandermeulen, I see your hand up. And then I'm sorry, Board Member Brucey, did you raise your hand?
I think you're probably going to know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. Individuals with disabilities need to be continue to be a part of the committee. In the 2020 ad hoc, I think that Martha and other individuals with disabilities on that community, both invisible and visible, were essential in showing what is needed for safety and security from their perspective. And oftentimes that perspective isn't always heard. I like the Madtown Mamas, but I also want to go bigger than that. I think we need to reach out to things like, you know, United Cerebral Palsy. We need to reach out to other organizations that focus on things such as dyslexia or other disabilities who feel that their kids aren't feeling safe or secure at school. And it could be due to mental health that has exacerbated the condition. And I think that's a very important point that we should focus on.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Board Member Vandermeulen. Are there any other board members who'd like to speak before we move on to our next meeting? Board Member Lucy.
Thank you. When it comes to membership, I would like to strongly advocate for bringing in at least one student representative of a gender equity club at our high schools, and also either having the Rape Crisis Center or Domestic Abuse Intervention Services days represented on this committee potentially.
Thank you. And similarly to other ad hocs, board members will nominate members and will nominate a certain number of members. And we've heard over and over again that one of the issues with the last committee was actually the size in terms of that committee's ability to have a productive dialogue amongst its members. And so thinking to who you as an individual board member want to recommend, and also thinking through the size that we think this committee can exist at and be functioning. And I agree with both of those recommendations. Chris.
I would just follow that up quick with, the issues with sexual violence and MMSD are going way back, and I don't think that community has been represented on a committee to date. So that's why I wanted to lift that up. I really think we need to be intentional about ensuring that this committee directly addresses sexual violence and has the people at the table to do that effectively and address it from a cultural point of view.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Chris. And I guess I can say I will be committed to nominating somebody from Rape Crisis Center and somebody from a gender equity club. And if other board members are also thinking about nominating those folks, we should talk about it so that we don't see duplicate nominations to the ad hoc. I saw Ananda's hand and then I saw Sabian's.
Maya also had her hand. And you know, when we first started having this conversation around the committee, Gordon and I had an opportunity to talk pretty extensively around how do we just, you know, what felt important, in particular for centering young people. So making sure that that the largest composition of the group of this committee is of young people, similar to many other committees where we put a young person as a member, that we is the person that we hear the least. And so if we wanted to really center young people's voice, you know, making sure that there's a balance skewed to having more young people in the committee. And I really appreciate President Muldrow, you mentioning the size. That was something that came up from having conversations with previous committee members. The other component that was really challenging was folks not having the same language or the same language as in system language, or the same ways to speak to the issues that everyone just now shared. So, you know, so for example, board member Brenda Muellen, you know, Gordon and I were thinking about just hosting a meeting with a large composition. So, you know, it's beyond just having that one person, that other person, but just having, you know, a very robust representation from multiple members of the disability community. You know, we often miss lots of intersectional identities when we're trying to bring one person and the other, but that to have a core committee that has, you know, that's comprised by young people and also comprised by systems. You all know I'm currently chairing the city county education committee, and it was a missed opportunity for me, or I guess awakening for me to hear and to learn over this past month when we were in dealing with lots of different crises as we're trying to open the school, how you know, some elected officials were saying like, oh no, this is the school's responsibility, you know, and then so we have the responsibility of every social inequities that's happening, you know, in our community, that emerges in our community, and we're also charged to solve all of them, and that just doesn't feel that is the most effective way. So making sure that we bring city staff, county staff, and district staff that can actually do the things that we are having conversations. Thank you. And I know, Gordon, I'd love for you to add anything else to.
Board Member Castro and then Board Member Peterson. And then, I'm sorry, Gordon, did you want to speak directly to what Ananda just said?
Yes, please.
All right, Gordon, we'll hear from you first and then we'll go through the rest of the folks on the deck.
Thank you. So yeah, like what Riley said, you know, we will, you know, talk to a larger group, and, you know, we plan on even doing it at our schools too. Kind of like what student groups do, where we talk to a lot of other people in our school community, because we understand that, you know, the current, like where the proposed composition of the committee is not, overly representative of what, the people that we want to help, uplift and empower here. But so which is why we want to go out into the community and go to them and ask them for their voice. We don't just expect people just to come to us, which is why we are planning to host community sessions, to advertise for people to come in and have a conversation with us around this work. I just want to, just throw that out there, that we want to go out to the community and get, hear some voices and, take them into consideration.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Gordon and Ananda. And I think that's a major departure from how we've done this work in the past, in terms of being available to the community and engaging different communities proactively in conversations. And so I want to say that I fully support that approach to this work, and I'm very grateful to you both for really thinking about how to bring the community into this work and make sure that when we say community, we don't just mean the group of people who have the most access to the board or the most access to individual board members, but we really have an expansive relationship with the people who live here. And so I really appreciate you all for doing that work and for broadening our ability as a board to be inclusive and intentional. Board member Castro and then board member Pearson.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is really important to host these meetings in person, which is something that we could not do, during the peak of COVID. And then, finding innovative ways to involve the community, given the constraints of this being a legal group and not everyone can participate in the formal conversations. But I think every meeting having a good public comment period, hosting them in person at school so that before and after meetings, folks from the community have an opportunity to interact and share ideas with people that are on the committee would be very beneficial. And the last thing I'll say, and this came up, is that we're asking the most impacted or the folks who are most harmed by these systems to participate. And that is a lot of labor, emotional and physical, and possibly exploring providing a stipend for individuals on the committee to thank them for making contributions and trying to give back to their community in this way, because it can be emotionally heavy. These conversations are heavy for a lot of people as they've been directly impacted. And so I think a stipend could also provide an incentive for someone to share their experience and recommendations.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, board member Castro. Board member Pearson.
The first thing, what you said, Sabian, was one of the points that I was gonna make about stipends. And I've worked on different committees and still are on different boards. And that's one of the things about when you are talking to communities that have the emotional labor that they must exude, having some type of payment or some type of stipend, or whether it's a gift card or whatnot, just so that thank them for their time. So maybe we can look into doing that as a budgetary piece. One of the things that I wanted just to mention too was that once we get a good scope of what we're going to be working with and actually have the outline, I think that should drive who we actually have on the actual committee. I think I agree with you, if we're going to have so many people, that conversation will just a lot of times not go as far as we want it to go. But if we're having our focus and have those people who can contribute to that focus, for instance, what Chris said about having someone from the Rape Crisis Center or DAYS there, if we are charged with the sexual assault and consent pieces, then obviously we want that representative there, and we, don't need to have other representatives as the larger group. I think that it is still important that we make sure we do what Gordon said and Ananda said, really focusing on finding ways that we can engage the community at whole. So a lot of times I feel like what I'm excited about this ad hoc is that it feels as though we're not going to be similar to other ad hocs that I've been part of, or other boards or other committees that I have been part of. that we're actually going to do what we say we're going to do and actually walk the walk. And I'm really excited about that and actually make some change happen. So yeah, definitely we'll have to be going out there in person and doing more than just sitting in a meeting once a month. So I'm excited about that.
I think the last thing I want to speak to before we close out this meeting, and Chris, I just saw your hand, so you'll close us out. But I want to speak to the staff that supports us doing this. I think so often we don't acknowledge the tremendous amount of labor that people pour into organizing these meetings. And just right now, in order for us to move forward, I have to refine the notes from this meeting in terms of what we're charging this group with. And the person taking notes is Barb. And the person who will be doing a lot of the support around the logistics of pulling people together and following up and creating this space is our administrative team, but very specifically Barb Osborne. And so I think really respecting that there's a lot of people with a lot of work on their plate who are going to work very hard to help us do this and to do this with us and our community is something we want to be mindful of and aware of as we take this on. This is big work, it's important work, and the only way we can do it well is if we do it together. And so I want to be rooted in gratitude for the people who have done this work before us and the people who are doing this work right now with us. And with that being said, Crystal Ms. Schmidt.
I hate to even throw one more thing in after that because I really appreciate those comments. I just wanted to go back to something that Gordon said when he was speaking about having SMART goals and finding things that are doable. And as I'm sitting here looking at Gordon and Nama who are on here, and they are seniors this year, so they are going to be graduating in June and we are already in January. Just maybe we're going to have to figure out how this group can do some short-term and long-term. I mean, a lot of these things that we're talking about tonight are going to be long-term work that we're going to be investing in. But how can we define some of these things in the short term while we have these students with us? I know that there's a lot of upcoming student Senate members who, and, you know, we'll have new board, you know, representatives too come on, but to have Nama and Gordon with us, I just really hope we take advantage of this short time that we do have. So.
Oh, thank you. I think that is a beautiful note to end on. And thank you, Gordon and Nama, for all your leadership and all the work that you're bringing to this process. I am now going to motion for us to go into closed session.
Sorry.
I gotta read it.
I'm sorry.
I move that the Board of Education go into closed session for the purposes of reviewing and receiving advice from counsel regarding disciplinary proceedings and decisions involving an individual student pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.85, 1A, F, and G, and 118.125 and or 120.13. 1E, and for the purposes of considering negotiation strategies regarding collective bargaining base wage for all MMSD bargaining units pursuant to a Wisconsin State Statute, section 19.8212 and 19.51E.
So moved.
Second.
Nama, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. We are now in closed session. Thank you all.
Recess for a second.
And we will recess for 5 minutes and we will come back at 6:05.
Someone else will have to come back, who's involved in the other session item. Have to re-enter. So for right now, it's between Monica and the board. Thank you.